On The Urbanist, we're always asking what makes a city truly livable. This September, find some answers in Barcelona as Monocle hosts its annual Quality of Life conference. 3 days of panels, ideas and good conversation with global mayors, architects and policy pioneers, all over good food and a glass of something local. Find out more and book your seat at monocle.com/conference.
Hello and welcome to The Urbanist, Monocle's programme all about the built environment. I'm your host, Andrew Tuck. Coming up...
You can't let perfect be the enemy of the good. You've got to have a go. You've got to experiment.
What are some of the different perspectives we can take on designing our buildings and urban areas? Today we look at architecture and design through some new lenses, from a neighbourhood led by independent brands to an emphasis on innovation, and a look at a pioneering report aiming to be a new blueprint in a rapidly changing world. That's all ahead in the next 30 minutes, right here on The Urbanist with me, Andrew Tuck. So, for our first perspective, we look at one way of rethinking how to structure a new neighbourhood development. Deniz Ibrahim is the head of Future and Place at Legal & General Investment Management. He's the visionary behind a strategy that weaves together 26 independent stores, 12 makers labs, 11 wellness studios, market stalls, a stunning co-working hub, podcast studios, and even more at New Acres in Wandsworth, the first built neighbourhood for independent brands in London. Deniz Ibrahim came into the studio recently to speak with Monocle's Carlotta Rebello, and Carlotta began by asking what New Acres is all about.
I joined the business 5 years ago as originally head of retail. And I'm a designer by background, not a real estate guy. And I came in to do two very key things. One was to shift our view or the culture in the business around how we approach retail and shops and the consumer-facing environments, but also to think about the space and spatially, how do we begin to future-proof that? So rewinding 5 years ago, we built out a philosophy which was basically doing a couple of things, becoming much more consumer-centric. Real estate was all about occupier, not customer. So we were really thinking about how to become much more focused on the person that walks through our doors. It was about being data orientated to really understand the behaviours of our environment, becoming partnership driven with our occupiers and making sure we weren't landlord-tenant, but actually partners within that. And then really thinking about diversification, both diversification in mix and experience, but also diversification in revenue, and really making sure that we can future-proof those assets. Fast forward 3-4 years of future-proofing town centres, we realised that that philosophy that we devised and began to pilot was really relevant broadly across the business. So 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, we launched a business called Future Places. And the Future Places team is primarily driven around placemaking. And we really believe that it's building on that philosophy, but focused on ensuring that we create really relevant, really dynamic neighbourhoods in the heart of cities. So New Acres is probably the flagship and one of the first projects that we're delivering under that umbrella. So New Acres Wandsworth is a purpose-built, build-to-rent development. It has 1,000 flats, of which 35% are affordable. It's a flagship rental development for us with a really thriving neighbourhood on the ground floor. And the neighbourhood that we're delivering is around 50,000 square foot. So that is roughly 40 shops that we're animating and one relatively large co-working space in the heart of that.
Now, you have described this neighbourhood in the past as the first new build, independent-led neighbourhood in London. How does New Acres differ from, typical mixed-use neighbourhoods then?
Let's firstly think about who the customer is here. So you've got a resident upstairs that is buying into the story of the environment that they're living in. So this is not just about renting a 2-bed flat. They want to rent an environment that resonates with themselves and their lifestyle. So the neighbourhood that we are trying to create in New Acres was independently led. It wasn't going back to the old way of doing things, which was extremely reactive, saying we have a series of boxes, we need to rent it, because actually that ground floor is the DNA. It's the unique personality of that pocket of city, that development. And how do we differentiate ourselves from other places? It's by creating something unique and different. So the brands for us, we really wanted to focus and celebrate independent brands. So independent to us meant it was a first shop, their second shop, or a relocation. it was really important that those brands believed in what they were coming into in terms of New Acres and really wanted to create something which was civic, democratic, and really outwardly facing. One of the big things for us within retail we've discovered is that the value that it's driving is beyond the box. It is a vertical value. It is driving value to the residents above, and that to us means occupancy, it means retention, so making sure people stay there because they love living there. But also, most importantly, it's got a horizontal value, making sure that these neighbourhoods look outwardly. They have a balance and a blurring of boundaries between the existing communities and this new community that we're landing in the middle of this city. So that is proving to be really important when you talk about independence, when you talk about local business, when you talk about activating public realm. It has this horizontal value, which is really key for us.
The description is almost, everything against the traditional agents in the sense of how you fill the spaces. So it makes me wonder about if more developers should take this curatorial approach to placemaking.
For us, it was really important to ensure that we had a curated approach to this environment, bringing in a team of people that were talking the language of the brand. Because there's one thing saying, I'm going to do this, right? We're going to create an independent neighbourhood, but having a very traditional route to get us there, the brands won't resonate or believe us. So actually what we have to do is ensure the team is engaged and understands that world in order to deliver it authentically. The slight nuance here is that we are Legal and General. We are a long-term investor, so we have a long-term view, and everything that we do is based on two things in terms of future places. It's one, making incredible places for people, and two, ensuring it's future ready, which means to us that it's not about creating something which is a fad for 2-3 years. This has to be sustainable. So the long-term view is really important. So we can, in some ways, afford to create a really interesting narrative to see the longer-term value off the back of it.
That long-term view goes to that question of resilience, of delivering a resilient neighbourhood. As you've been describing, this is a project that champions independent brands, local brands, businesses. How crucial is the involvement and engagement with those types of business to deliver a resilient neighbourhood that has that long-term vision that will work for the community, not just now, but in the future too?
When we talk about brands and independence, actually we don't just mean people that are selling stuff. Because if you want to create resilience and you want to create a neighbourhood which is thriving for everyone, you have to ensure, before you've even engaged anyone, your place strategy and your place story is coherent and it's relevant. And before we even did anything, we created a place strategy and a story for New Acres, which we felt was the right way to create that longer-term impact. And to do that, we did a couple of things. It was based on what I call rhythms. So this idea that no one ever wants to live in an environment which is a ghost town or extremely busy. It's this constant hum. So how do you create a mix which addresses the rhythms component? The second piece was about this dual concept, programmability. So how do you begin to engage brands that don't only just sell things? They also have experiences that you can join. They also have communities that they want to engage. So there were two really big things that ensured sustainability of that impact. The third thing was actually we want to create a series of anchored activations. So alongside those independent brands, we created 3 spaces. One, which was the Foundry co-working space, which we co-founded 2 years ago and I sit on the board of, which was a dedicated SME micro-enterprise business incubator, essentially. So you can come and rent a desk, you can come and network, you get business support, and that's sat in the heart of New Acres. And then next to that, we're going to launch a Makers Lab, which kind of harks back to the entrepreneurial spirit of the 1800s in Wandsworth, which is about making, manufacturing, producing, and that was another anchor. And then you had what we're calling New Acres Studios, which was more around wellness and practitioner space. So once you have these 3 things, one about work, one about animation, making, production, and one really digitally focused, because a lot of those practitioners have digital audiences that come here. You can then hook the brands, so the lifestyle, the food, the markets, all of the animation around that. And that's how I believe you ensure a longer term impact.
Another aspect here, of course, Wandsworth is this year's borough for culture here in London.
Indeed.
I'm curious about how that cultural energy has also been woven into this project. How does it manifest in everything you've been doing at New Acres?
It's really interesting, right? Because of this story and this strategy and this vision that we've created, we've built really strong connections with the local authority who are working on that borough of culture. So the dialogue is consistent, which is really great. How have we integrated this and ingrained it from day one? Don't forget, this was a building site for many years. So it was really important that when we were talking about this to brands, to stakeholders, to people, we didn't want them to think this was just a really fancy presentation. This was actually happening. So we launched something which was a pop-up space for 1 year. It's coming to an end in the next month or so, which was called The Next. And it's short for the New Acres Experience. And that was a meanwhile space to attempt to create a physical manifestation of the future of New Acres. So it gave people a flavour. The space was split into 3 areas. One, it was a coffee shop, essentially. It was a community coffee shop called Cafe 404. It was run by a resident. They hired local people, and it was a coffee shop, a community space. Next to that was a pre-Foundry before Foundry opened, so it was a free workspace for people to work. And then the last component was a collaboration with the Royal College of Art, and this is how we're embedding culture. And there, the Interior Architecture School and the Sculpting School came in and taught their lessons there. They came and took waste from the site and built sculptures, which will be exhibited in public realm areas, but also created events. So all of a sudden, you had this space, which is 2,000-3,000 square foot, which was constantly animated in the middle of this building site. And that was the catalyst to create cultural and creative integration and essentially set the tone for what we wanted to create beyond when that was over and we launched the New Acres neighbourhood, as it will be in the next couple of months.
I'm really keen to hear from your experience and your work over the past couple of years that have culminated into this project. What lessons do you think you've learned so far and that New Acres can inform globally for people who are looking at revitalising a neighbourhood?
For me, the biggest important piece was making a strategy a reality. And the only way you're going to make it a reality is by picking a really strong team of designers, curators, editors who understand brand, understand customer, and talk the language of content rather than language of real estate. Because the real estate bit, we understand square footage, rent, rates, yield. We understand that world, but making sure we bring in people who talk the language of our occupiers, understand the lifestyle of our residents and the community around it is really important. So my biggest learning for myself and how we are scaling this across different cities across the UK is to ensure that we find, source and work collaboratively with local creative talent.
Dens Ibrahim there in conversation with Carlotta Rebello. For our next perspective, it's all about innovation and how to emphasise that in the architecture and design field. At the London office of HKS Architects and Designers, newly appointed Managing Director Gary Clark is spearheading a transformation. He wants the studio to be an innovation lab for the built environment, helping it to address the challenges of the modern age. So how do we transform architecture into a more agile, research-driven field that can respond and adapt to climate and political uncertainty? And what are the experimental tools that can help? Gary recently joined Monocle's David Stevens in studio to unpack the topic, and David began by asking how HKS sets itself apart from other firms, and also how Gary became involved.
Yeah, I think the reason they approached me was I'm slightly different as an architect. I look things through a kind of prism of evidence-based design. I'm very interested in research and development. And then also part of my role is I've been an academic and a researcher before. So I think that interplay between practice research and also teaching has really kind of offered something sort of different to the practice. And I think the second thing was really the lifelong in terms of professional commitment to sustainability. So how do we actually address climate change really fully? So it's not just about saying great sound bites. It's about how do we deliver on actually what we're doing. So I think that's two things that really resonated. The last part is then it just aligned with their rethinking in terms of HKS is a transformation of the entire business to actually be future ready. So again, there's our 4 goals really is first off is looking at artificial intelligence. How do we really embrace that? How do we change the way that we work at a fundamental level to embrace that for the future? So that's the first one. Regenerative sustainability is that next item, which is then how do we address climate change fully? And then how do we really dive into the detail in terms of research and development? And then also this last part is this cross-pollination, which is We're a sectorised business in terms of lots of speciality of subject matter experts. But how do we sort of work together and cross those boundaries, become these general practitioners, and then look at this environment as a complete holistic entity? So I think that's kind of the whole thing. But the thing that marks out HKS in terms of what differentiates us is I think we can deliver fantastic buildings, we've got fantastic designers, but for me it's the commitment to research and development. I think it's got the largest research and development department I've ever worked with in any architecture firm, so I've worked in quite a few over the years. So that commitment to R&D is that differentiator. We can go deeper, we can give better advice to our clients, and that's my role, is to transform the London studio to really embrace that.
How do you set up a firm or an individual to innovate? You know, it's almost like saying, be better, be more innovative, be more creative, you know, these little things. But there must be ways that you plan in your new role to inject that sort of innovation and that maybe that ethos into the people of HKS London, and hopefully further afield than that.
It's not something you can just say, right, tomorrow we're going to innovate. But yeah, I worked with James Dyson's labs over in Malmesbury, and a little insight into innovation. James has set up an organisation which is always looking for the next thing. And then that clarity of saying, well, that's what the expectation is. And then everybody that comes in terms of engineers know that's actually what's required. And then he's quite demanding in terms of every product has got to have a certain number of innovations within it. So there's actually a target there in terms of what you're going to do. So a top-down approach here is really, you've got to be absolutely clear that we are going to innovate. And we start now, but actually you've got to support the team. So I think that the first one for me is the fear of failure. There's got to be a no-blame culture in that environment because, again, big organisations, and I think that's where Dyson and others, Apple, early Apple maybe, is actually no idea is silly and then explore it to a conclusion. You don't let the kind of middle managers to then control the creative process. So I think what it is really aim high. Don't worry if you don't hit there because we're there as an organisation to support that. So again, we're not going to go to the bleeding edge of things, especially with our clients. But again, it's a controlled innovation and then exploring things. So that fear of failure, removing that, I think, together with the tools of innovation. So we got a fantastic advisory department, again, linked to our R&D department, but they explore these kind of ideas, how you can do facilitated sessions to break out ideas. And yeah, one of my teams just now is doing a thought leadership visioning session just as a fair moment. They're going to look at the future of hospitality in 10 years and then explore innovation ideas. And in the back of that, that will then set up sort of thought leadership papers. So that's the plan.
As I mentioned, I wanted to drill down on some of those areas, and one of those being climate. And I know you're a big supporter of adaptive reuse, reusing rather than building new. Maybe describe your thought behind that and why you think that's so important.
Yeah, we got roughly about 45 million buildings in Britain, and we've got the worst building performance in estates in Europe. And what that is we've got an old estate, but also the newer buildings have not been maintained properly over years. So hence, we're sitting on a very kind of degraded estate. Now, they're responsible, 40% of all energy use and carbon emissions come from buildings. And then the mass majority of that is existing buildings. So this is the thing, is that we've got to address the elephant in the room, which is addressing our estate. If we then improve buildings, we can then not only improve the quality of the building itself, the assets and the people that actually occupy it, and actually our cities as well. We regenerate parts of our cities. But that is the single biggest thing that we can do to change and reduce climate emissions. So just by reusing the structural frame of a building, the structure, you can save 60% of embodied carbon emissions right from that moment. So really, that's the bottom-up approach. But top-down, really, we're hoping that legislation, so the net zero building standard that's hopefully going to be released quite soon, we're in beta testing just now, that will drive changes. But we need government to really legislate that. And really, I think business is waking up to this. I think a lot of our clients, especially Grosvenor in London, they're looking at their estate, it's older buildings, but actually quite adaptable in terms of the townhouse. And you can see you can refresh that. You can put lots of different uses within them. And then you create a vibrant city escape. And you're doing two things. You win in terms of the estate, but actually creating lovely places for people to come and visit.
You mentioned a little bit there design standards, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, WELL certification, REBA standards, a few of those which you've been a part of defining. How much of a net positive do you think they are to the industry as a whole? Obviously, you must believe in them. You've put a lot into making them happen. But are they really driving development forward? Are we finding that there are these roadblocks where it's actually making it harder for some people than we have to get through? And how do we get through those roadblocks? Where do you think we're at in that conversation with how developers are responding to them?
A couple of things there. So architecture and sustainability is very complicated. So what we need is concepts that are understandable in themselves. You could communicate to others. So splitting out what human ecology and built environment ecology is into small components actually gives everybody a bit more clarity of what they can do, what they can affect change. And then you look at the interrelationships between those, and then that's then gives you the kind of idea. So I think you need to break it up. How you break it up is then different ways. So if I start off with regenerative design is very much on the agenda just now. Some lovely aspirational statements. And again, we use the AIA 10 point of excellence, which is great. They're aspirational statements, but if you just work at that level, how do you know if you've actually achieved that from an actual outcomes point of view? So that's where it comes into the UN Sustainable Development Goals, is actually translating that into measurable things. The UN SDGs are very complicated. They're more used to countries, institutions and governments. So what we tried to do was then create something that could be used at a project level. Now, BREEAM and WELL and LEED, these are assessment methods that are used around the world, are great. And they were great to lift up the experience of people 30 odd years ago. But now, I think hopefully there's an upskilling of the people that know this and do this regularly. We don't need that. And in a way, that becomes a hamper, is that a principle and a checklist doesn't ultimately deliver an outcome. And that's why I wrote the RIB Sustainable Outcomes Guide. And that's linked to the 2030 challenge. What I was trying to do is create the DNA of a building or a development of how you can actually measure and manage how you've achieved a real sustainability. And you've got to come back in and you've got to measure it. So that's really where we are in terms of how we do it. So, but we need, I think, all of those things. But for me, it's championing the outcomes and what comes next on that.
Is there a project that you can think of, either completed, in production, either HKS or not, that you think really exemplifies the right way to be doing this? You know, it ticks all the boxes of how you think this should be done.
I'm sure there's lots of kind of examples where we're doing that in terms of other firms as well. But I think that the key thing there is, you've got to try. You can't let perfect be the enemy of the good. You've got to have a go. You've got to experiment. So what we're doing in terms of our London studio, each sector will be choosing a pilot study. So we've already started that with some healthcare projects and schools and things like that. So they will be taking those projects and they'll be applying the tools that we're actually creating just now. And then we're going to be using that through the rest of the year. So that's the plan this year, is we're going to be experimenting. But really, I think that the approach of regenerative design, I would probably suggest look at King's Cross Argent Scheme, is all the things we talked about there. The ultimate outcome is there. You're creating a place that is an identity. People want to go there. It is sustainable. So it's been regenerated to sustain. And it's attractive in terms of the rental values have gone up, the value of everything's gone up. And if you look at that 25 years ago, it's completely changed. So we need to get those items, those types of buildings and those developments more consistent. We need to do more of them and we need to do faster.
My thanks there to Gary Clark in conversation with David Stevens. Finally, today it's time for the design perspective. Arcadis is a global design and engineering consultancy company whose mission is to improve quality of life in communities. Its projects range from mobility to environment, with projects such as the Fraser River Tunnel in British Columbia and flood mitigation efforts in Manhattan. It's also working on the first all-electric net zero school in the United States and the first net zero data centre in Silicon Valley. Mansoor Kazerouni is the Global Director of Architecture and Urbanism for Arcadis, and he joined me at the real estate trade show MIPIM a few months ago to launch their new report, The Design Perspective. I asked Mansoor to explain what's in the report and what it's hoping to achieve.
The Design Perspective is a series of insights and actionable ideas that are based on cross-sector, multidisciplinary collaboration that address 4 of the key challenges that we are confronting in the built environment today. And those relate to rapid urbanization and the need for affordable housing in a sustainable manner. It relates to digitization and the advent of AI and digital twins and the tools available at our disposal, but also with the proliferation of data and the need to store it and the demand for a huge amount of data centers that are hungry for energy and thirsty for water, how do we create sustainable solutions? And those kinds of insights into sort of the advent of technology. We've also dealt with sustainability at scale. And finally, of course, human centricity, because post-COVID, that human connection has needed to be restored in the environments that we design and create.
One thing you hinted at there is the need for cities all around the world to build in resilience as they develop and grow. Obviously something that seems to be fundamental to this report as well. Is that something that cities are thinking about well enough?
I think climate action is front of mind in cities the world over. Manhattan is one example. There are other cities globally that we're engaged with. Frankly, the genesis of Arcadis, which is a Dutch company in the Netherlands, was exactly that, was flood mitigation in the Netherlands. And so it's at the core of our DNA, but I think it is front of mind in cities world over. And it's not just flooding, it's other natural disasters, such as the fires we just experienced in Los Angeles.
I often find that the debate becomes sharper or more attuned after a disaster has happened.
Yes.
When you watch something like the unfolding of what happened in California with the fires, is there something there that you think we can do catch up now, but anywhere that faces this kind of risk should be putting in a different scenario, a different package of measures already to be resilient in case it happens?
100%, I think that. And, hindsight is always 20/20, but hopefully for other disaster-prone areas and cities, this is a great wake-up call. If you haven't considered it yet, and I know many cities are considering it, I think we all need to sit up and take notice.
We're hearing a lot of storylines coming out of the US at the moment about go easy on the climate, drill for more oil, maybe things aren't as bad as they are, stop talking about ESG and all of these things. Do you think there is a change in tone around the debate? Or do you think the partners you're talking to just see this as common sense, saving lives, practical, probably saving money in the end as well, and that it's baked into the system now and it's not going to go away?
I can tell you that none of our partners have indicated any change in course. I can tell you that as a firm, we remain committed at the highest level to achieving sustainable outcomes in every project, every opportunity that we engage with. And frankly, the way regulation and cities have evolved, I think there is a level of sustainability that's now embedded in how we advance these projects anyway. So I think it's going to be very difficult to reverse this tide.
How important is it also for a company like yours to be good storytellers in a way? Because, good design is adopted and enjoyed once it gets into play. In London, we were talking the other day about the Elizabeth line, a feat of engineering that actually all Londoners now love, but it's because it became a piece of human-centric design in the end. Is that something you're always thinking about, making sure that it's human-centric what you do?
Yes, human centricity is one of our core values, and we honestly believe that transit plays a significant role in not just transporting you from A to B, but it is a stimulus for equitable development. Transit-oriented communities are a highly sustainable form of development that foster equity, that foster communality, that allow even socioeconomic communities to thrive and grow and create that connectivity to the rest of the city and what it has to offer. So I think transit plays a very significant role in the human centricity of cities.
When we look at our cities, for them to thrive and do good, they need places where we can congregate and come together. They need interesting public realm. They need reasons to exit your house and mingle and rub shoulders with other people. How do you make sure that that is a part of the story as you begin to come up with amazing engineering solutions? How do you make sure that those things are also evident?
As you will see in the design perspective, we've highlighted numerous instances where activation of the public realm, creating blended uses that really engage and draw people out into communities, and rethinking some of the existing sort of built environment. I'll give you an example. We've been very focused on stadium adjacent work. And if you look at stadiums and other large sort of entertainment anchors, they tend to be these singular buildings sitting in seas of parking. We've really focused on how to convert that into a blended environment such that it is not just alive on game night. And how do we bring retail and residential and hospitality with a strong sense of place in a highly curated manner with very focused sightlines, such that these anchors convert from being a single-use facility into communal hubs that really activate communities, that really foster a sense of place. And so we've done that with retail, we've done that with entertainment anchors, and many, many other examples of these large facilities. So I think placemaking is really important. And what we've learned post-COVID is there is an innate desire in people to mix and mingle. And that really happens when we get out into the public realm.
My thanks there to Mansoor Kazerouni. You can find out more about the report at arcadis.com. And that's all for this week's episode of The Urbanist. You can follow us for new editions of the show every week, and you can subscribe to Monocle magazine for reports on all things design, architecture and urbanism too. Just visit monocle.com. The Urbanist is produced by Carlotta Ribello and by David Stevens, who also edits the show. I'm Andrew Tuck. Goodbye, and thank you for listening, City Lovers.